Samantha and Lucie. What was the GDL like? Obviously, you said it's very intense. Is there anything more you can add to that?
Well, I think I'll let Samantha go first because I did it quite a lot of years ago. So I think it's even called something different now. So I suspect Samantha's got a better answer for you on that because they've probably changed it all by now.
Yeah, and I did the GDL in the academic year 2016 to 2017, and it was very intense, as Lucy says. But when I did it, I only had to go in 2 days a week, which was an absolute relief because I was commuting to London from the New Forest at the time. So I was very glad not to have to go in every single day. The way I was taught it was there wasn't any lectures. You could watch the odd talk online, and it was all sort of workshop seminar based classes. All of the exams were problem-based questions, and I think this was the point earlier, is that it's a practical focus on studying law rather than an academic focus on the law. And I found it hard to transition to from essay-based subjects because I wanted to waffle on for a significant word count, and that's just not how you do things with a practical approach to law, or multiple choice as well, which everyone's always for. Yes, the GDL is intense, but you can't get by with skipping an odd seminar or not being prepared for a class because it will have a significant effect on your ability to pass it. It's something you need to dedicate yourself to completely, with my ultimate feedback from that year.
Okay, well, I'm glad I let Samantha go first then, because it obviously has changed quite a lot. Because I was there sort of 9 to 5 every day, lectures and workshops and practical things. But so the practicalities have obviously changed. But I would echo that the core elements of it obviously haven't. So the problem-based assessment is obviously still the same, and so that suited me as a science graduate quite well. Needing to give sort of concise and sort of formulaic answers. So I think obviously it's changed in the way that they deliver the course to you, but it sounds to me like the sort of basic content of it and the way of assessment hasn't changed very much.
That's great. And then on to Kate now. How did you find the law senior status degree? What was that like? Is it different?
I really enjoyed it, and as I said, I think it's a really special thing that Queen Mary has available, because I was in classes alongside the people studying the 3-year LLB, who were all 10 years younger than me, but it was fine, and I felt like I was part of that big cohort of students. And I had the same teaching methods as they had, so lectures and then tutorials. I took more credits during the year than they did, but as opposed to the option which the GDL offers, where you're doing a very practical, very exam-focused study method, it's a little bit more academic. You really get down into the cases, you read the dissenting opinions, you read the essay articles about who was right in what dissenting opinion, and if you're kind of a geek about that sort of thing, then you can have a little geek out about it, and you know, that's quite fun for me. And again, because I studied English literature, my strengths are in essay writing and reading a text and picking apart a text and arguing about a text. So that worked very well for me and for the skills that I already had. So I found it suited what I wanted quite well. It also gave me, nowadays, the pupillage gateway opens very early. So it gave me a year's worth of exam grades and mini pupillages and a summer of work experience before I had to turn up and start making applications for pupillage. Whereas nowadays, if you do the GDL, you have to turn up making applications without any law exam grades yet. And perhaps unless you've really been ahead of the game, you haven't necessarily started doing law-related work experience. So the benefit of having the 2-year program for me was I had a bit of time to to pad out my CV with law related things that then I could put into my pupillage applications.
That's brilliant. And that's the last from me now. I'm going to pass on to Claudia for the last round of questions. But thank you so much for all your answers. I know I've learned a lot, so I hope everyone watching has as well.
So I'm just going to ask some general questions just to help some non-law students out. So firstly, this is for everyone. We'll go into that same order again. So Lucie, Kate and Samantha. Do you have any tips or advice for non-law students? So how they can stay proactive during their undergraduate degree or even during the GDL, and who they should be talking to?
Okay, well, I think one of the main tips I would have is joining an Inn of Court or using the resources at the Inns of Court, because if you're not doing a law degree, you don't have that natural contact with well, other lawyers and with people in the industry. So I think the Inns of Court are a great resource to use. In terms of joining an inn, I joined Lincoln's Inn, and the reason for that was scholarships. All of the Inns of Court offer scholarships, and I think it's been mentioned that one of the things about transitioning from a normal degree to a GDL or the BBC is the cost of it. So even when I did, when I did it, I think it was approximately 10,000 for the PGDL and approximately the same for the BBC. I imagine it's a lot more now. But scholarships were a key thing for me, therefore. So I joined an inn that had scholarships that I felt would best, I would have the best chance of getting, basically, which was Lincoln's Inn. But then that gave me access to various courses that they ran, mooting that they ran. It gave me access to dinners that they have, where you get to go and have dinner in the Inns of Court, which is lovely, but you also get to meet other barristers and make contacts. So I would say joining an Inn of Court is something that would be very beneficial for non-law students. And then obviously doing any work experience on mini pupillages you can get. I think that is, as I said, I think it's probably more difficult now than it used to be. Certainly in our chambers, as I think in most now, there's quite a formal application process for mini pupillages. And often they come later on because you need to sort of show something in your CV to get a mini pupillage in the first place. But any experience you can get in any law related field is good, because not only does that give you something on your CV, but it also gives you contact with people who work in the law in one form or another, and you can pick their brains about what it's about. And when you go for interviews and people say, why do you want to do this? You can say, well, actually, you know, you can draw on some actual real experiences, which I think is very important. So those would be my two tips. Oh, and also any debating societies that you've got, because they're not just, most universities, debating societies are not just confined to the law students. So any sort of debating you can do as well would be beneficial.
Kate, I don't know if her internet's working or not. Is it frozen for just me? I can't tell.
She looks frozen to me too, so maybe until
yeah, Samantha, do you want to go, and then if Kate's internet starts working, then we'll put her on.
Yeah, sure. I think just to reiterate, really, I would say there are four main things. So the first, of course, being work experience. Lucie has mentioned mini pupillages, but I think the status mini pupillages have on a pupillage application depend on practice area. Certainly in criminal law, mini pupillages are typically seen as a tick box exercise to show an interest in the law. Nobody really, it's quite hard to get a lot out of a mini pupillage because essentially what you're doing is just following someone around for a day or the days of however long the mini pupillage is. So getting interesting work experience is something that as a non-law student you have the time to do. So whether that's working for pro bono organisations, working as a paralegal, anything that you can think is a bit inventive and a bit different to set your application apart is something you have the time to do. I remember in my interviews, quite a big thing that was discussed was me writing for my university's newspaper. So anything that's just a bit different, amateur dramatics, anything you can think of. And then second and thirdly, mooting and debating. It's just the classics that everyone seems to do to various levels, and just dedicating your time to trying to get to those competitions perhaps, and certainly joining societies. As Lucy mentioned, joining an Inn of Court, I'm a member of Inner Temple, and they sent me to the World University Debating Finals in Mexico and paid for all of that. So certainly there are those opportunities there that you can get early on. And then finally, who to talk to? The answer is a bit flippant, but it's everyone. If you're not someone who knows lots of barristers, I certainly didn't. And the more you talk to people and the more you chase out opportunities, the better you'll do. So whether that's going and doing a mini pupillage, seeing a particular barrister in court, and approaching them and say, would you be open if I emailed you and asked, to do a mini pupillage with you? I've done that. Or talking to someone at an event, certainly attending a panel like this. It's all very helpful, but actually chasing out opportunities as a result of it. So talk to everyone.
Thank you for that. Kate, is your...
Yes, hello. Sorry, my internet's behaving badly. This is the modern world that we live in. I do all my hearings from chambers where the connection is better because it's bad here. Sorry. Anyway, I won't repeat what's been said. But I will say that administratively, one thing to be doing is just getting aware of what deadlines there are and what things you need to do, because once you start making your applications for things, there's quite a lot to get done. So the things to be aware of are things like Inn of Court scholarship applications. When are you going to do your mini pupillages? When are you going to apply for the bar course? When are you going to apply for pupillage? And just get all those dates in your diary. And I think the earliest one in the year is actually the Inn of Court scholarship deadline, which is usually in November. And so just do your research about what processes are required and make sure you don't miss any deadlines for those. And the other thing that I would say is, alongside trying to get some form of advocacy experience like debating or mooting, is try and get something that gives you a bit of client care experience. That's one aspect of preparation for a career as an advocate that a lot of people miss. Work people, and you can get that in all sorts of ways. Volunteering places is a really good way to do it. You could probably even get that by working in some form of customer service, but just something that gives you some experience working with everyday people, connecting with people, and that's a real skill that you have to have. You can't just be somebody who's good at speaking to a judge or to a jury. You also have to be good at speaking to all sorts of other people, especially if, like me, you do a lot of work with so I do a lot of family law and a lot of criminal law and a lot of work with people who are vulnerable or who are at the margins of society in various ways. And if you haven't engaged with all sectors of the community before, it can be quite surprising to do that. So I would recommend getting out there and working with people as well.
Thank you for that. My next question actually links to one that Zara has just put in the chat. So for mini pupillage applications, what kind of things, I mean, you've kind of spoken about it briefly, but what kind of things can people put on their applications? Because obviously a lot of chambers try to have people who've commenced their legal studies as mini pupils. So for non-law students, that kind of limits it in some ways, depending on the chambers. So what kind of things can non-law students put to kind of stand out, to kind of make up for the not studying law?
Well, I think a lot of it's already been said in terms of mini pupillage is just one aspect. I think it very much depends on the type of chambers you're applying to, because I think it's clear, and I think as both Samantha and Kate have brought out, there's a different focus depending on the area of law you're going into. So Kate has talked about, having experiences that enable you to just talk to people, in terms of the areas of law that she does, that, people from the margins of society. That is not something which I think necessarily would apply to the commercial, if you're going into commercial law. So we wouldn't necessarily see that type of experience as being something you particularly need. But on the other hand, the sort of things that we look at probably are more towards the academic side, I have to say, of experiences. So we look at academic references about academic things that you have done which would take your degree or show you as being somebody that's particularly academically strong in your degree. So doing masters, for example, we have people that have done PhD. So I would say the focus with us is on the academic side of showing that strength in academia, but alongside things like mooting and debating, because it's still important that you can demonstrate those advocacy skills. And I think I would echo what Samantha said about if there's anything you can get on your CV, I think for any set of chambers that shows something different, something that will get, I think catch the imagination of the person who, like me, on the pupillage committee has to sift through hundreds of applications that all say a very similar thing about, I love your chambers because of this, and if you see somebody all of a sudden that's done something a little bit different and that has shown real enthusiasm about it, we're all human and we all kind of get our interest piqued by things like that, and it gives you something interesting to talk about in your interviews as well. So I'd echo what Samantha said about I think any set of chambers would be impressed if you've gone out there and shown initiative, I think, and grabbed opportunities, or put yourself out there, or put yourself in a position where you have been in charge of something, you've had to show leadership skills, anything like that, I think would be helpful.
Yes, I think, well, making yourself look interesting, as Lucy says, but also I think you want to come across as though you've done your research and you know what you're getting into. You've done your research into the chambers that you're applying to, and also that you've thought about what the career involves. I think the important thing to avoid is an application that reads as though you've maybe spammed off the same application to a dozen or so different sets. So speak knowledgeably about the set that you're applying to and the area of law that you're interested in. But yeah, there's no magic words. I mean, the most important thing is to come across as somebody who is driven, able academically, interesting, and good at going out and accomplishing things. And each person's story is going to be different, and I don't think anyone wants to read thousands and thousands of the same application over and over again. So if there's something special about your background or your story, then bring that to the forefront.
Just to add on a few things, and the first is that with any application, whether that's a mini pupillage or for pupillage, it's a really basic thing, but spelling from anything that makes your application look like it was done quickly, it is best avoided. Also, write a good covering letter as to why you want a mini pupillage. If it's a CV covering letter type application, explain that you don't have a law background and I'm interested in this because XYZ. Can I come and that's why I want to shadow you. I think this would be the sort of chambers that I would want to eventually apply to. It's a real explanation as to why you want that many pupillage rather than just something generic. Also applying good time. If deadlines are posted on various chambers websites, apply weeks in advance of them would be a top tip. In terms of work experience generally though, my biggest tip is build up. So you hear all of these dates and deadlines and everything that needs doing, and it feels like getting pupillage is something that will just fly by, and you have to all achieve all of these different things, tick all of these boxes all at once. You absolutely don't. I never took a break. I did my undergraduate, GDL, BPTC, worked, and then got pupillage. So I think the biggest tip is to build up. Now, for me, that was writing a letter to a local solicitor's firm or local high street saying, can I come in for a couple of days? That turned into a month. Then doing some pro bono whilst at university, and a bit of debating allowed me to write a CV up. And then I got another internship as a solicitor with solicitor's firm, having no intention of ever becoming a solicitor, and ended up going to court and then getting my first mini pupillage that way because I went to court. And suddenly it looks like I've got loads of law experience, when all I've done is it all started with one letter to a local solicitor's firm. And then you get round the fact that you don't law experience of a law degree on your CV, but you have something potentially that a lot of law students haven't had time to do, which is get that experience. So just because there are a finite number of chambers, there are way more solicitors firms. So cut it, or think about how you can come at it from a different direction, so that you can build up opportunities.
Thank you all for that. I've got one more set question before we move on to any questions we've got in the chat box. So this is to do with pupillage and when you can apply in the GDL. So I believe it's 3 months into the GDL you can apply for pupillage. But the question is, so what advice do you have on non-law students wanting to apply but are unsure which practice area that they want to specialise in? Because obviously with the GDL you're only starting off, especially you're only covering the core modules.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a really difficult one, because one of the answers is, you know, doing what sort of Samantha suggested, which is trying to get as much experience around the law, even if you can't get it in mini pupillages, but experiences of the law and around the law as you can, so that you are in a position to make some sort of informed choice if you are applying that early on. Now, if you haven't done that, or if you can't do that, there is no easy answer to what do you do if you still don't know what area you want to go into. Because one thing I would say is it's I suppose depending on the type of chambers you apply to, I mean, I suppose you could say, well, I'll just apply to more generalist sets if I'm not sure. But the thing is, it is a big decision, because if that's your round of pupillage applications, and if you get a pupillage in a set of chambers, that would then hopefully lead to a tenancy, and that would then hopefully lead to a career for, you know, the rest of your life in that set of chambers. Now, there is movement within the bar and people do move around, but once you are on that path, I think it's more difficult to jump off it. So certainly once I got pupillage at Atkin Chambers and then got tenancy, it would have been, if I hadn't wanted to be in that area of law, much more difficult for me to make the jump at that point for lots of religion and tenancy, and who's going to just throw that away. So I think if you're really, really not sure, you don't have to apply that early on. You know, that there are people that apply in the GDL, there are people that apply in the BVC, there are people that apply after that, there are people that apply in the GDL and get nothing the first time round, they don't get any offers, so they apply again in the BVC year. You know, I had a friend who didn't get anything in the GDL year, didn't get anything in the BVC year, and he then applied the year after his BVC and finally got a pupillage. So don't feel that there's an absolute pressure to apply in the GDL year if you really don't know the area of your law you're interested in. But there are some general sort of, there are some questions you can ask yourself, such as, you know, what sort of lifestyle do I want? Do I want to be going to court every day and arguing in front of juries? Because if you do want to do that, then it's fairly clear you want to be a criminal barrister. If you want to be doing sort of not going to court every day, but you want to be doing kind of what I do, which is commercial law effectively, sort of big cases, in-depth cases where you do go to court for applications and things, but what tends to happen is you do a long period of preparation, then you're in trial for, you know, anything from 2 weeks to, well, 6 months at a stretch. So there are things you can talk to your advisors on the GDL, so talk to the career advisors at the GDL, and sort of they might be able to help you narrow down your aspirations to certain areas of law. But as I say, I think if you really are absolutely unsure, then there is no absolute need to apply during your GDL year if you really don't know.
I think mini pupillages are a great way to see what the real life of doing certain areas of law is about. Finding something interesting academically is quite different from liking it as a practitioner. So it's quite helpful to go do a mini pupillage, see what a barrister in X area of law does from a day-to-day basis. If you are like me, someone who likes a lot of different things and really enjoys variety, you can apply to a mixed set. So I applied to a mixed common law set that does a little bit of everything. We all practice across everything as juniors, and then eventually, naturally, and informed by our experience, begin to specialize. And I love it. I really love it. I love changing from one area to the other. I love being able to hold my own in a number of different types of court, in a number of different types of proceeding. And eventually I will sort of find myself naturally honing an expertise in one or two areas. But I have very much enjoyed having a variety of options available to me. And I have surprised myself in what I've enjoyed. I've found that I actually really, really love and am good at family law, which I never would have looked twice at as a student. And it turns out it plays on a lot of my capabilities, my inherent capabilities, and is rewarding for me. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone somewhere where that was part of what they offer and part of what I had to do. So there aren't that many sets left that do a wide variety of different areas of law, but it's completely legitimate to not have your mind made up yet and to try to go to some of those places where there are lots of options on the table for you.
Well, I think mini pupillages are a great way of getting that variety in different practice areas. Like has already been said, you do need to get that practical take on what it's like. Certainly then if you decide you want to say specialise in criminal law or commercial law or whatever it is, you don't need to then put all of those mini pupillages on your application. You can then be selective, but at least you know for your sake. Certainly for me, mini pupillages were the way to rule out family law. I thought I enjoyed it academically, and then the realities of it just weren't for me. My advice is slightly different to Lucie's, which is quite interesting. I think it's very much depending on personal circumstances, but I'm very much of the view that any opportunity you have to apply for pupillage, take it. Obviously, once you've done the bar course, there's a 5-year deadline to get pupillage in. So doing the GDL, you get a free shot. Now, perhaps that's adjusting your expectations. When I applied in the GDL year, I just wanted one interview because I'd heard that pupillage interviews were like nothing I would have ever experienced before. So I wanted experience of one before getting sort of a full round of pupillage interviews, so to speak, and I ended up getting to the final stages of a pupillage application in my GDL year. So if that helps anyone, with 3 months of experience, you've just got to have some confidence and back yourself. And I got close to getting pupillage that year, which is further than I'd hoped to get, but certainly doesn't mean that it's impossible. And I know of people who've got pupillage in their GDL year too. And I think by choosing practice area, even if you don't know exactly, I think at that stage you'll be able to spot themes in your interests in certain practice areas. So for example, when it comes to clients and cases, do you like the idea of working with people in vulnerable situations? So that would be maybe public law, criminal law, family law, or do you like cases that more involve money and business to business type cases, so that commercial contract type areas of law, and then you can whittle it down within that. So rather than applying to a set that does absolutely everything, and certainly I don't really know of one that exists, you can apply to a set that perhaps do more than one practice area, and you can go about it that way by trying to think about themes between different practice areas, to then narrow it down once you've had that time to get more experience. Whilst none of us have done pupillage there, I know of a lot of people with non-law backgrounds who end up going to the government legal department or places because that's a way of getting variety, and also I think they encourage people to say, I don't really know what practice area I want to do, I want to have a go at everything. Saying that to a chambers would be perhaps quite a dangerous application. There are opportunities out there if you do your research.
Thank you all for that. So I'm just going to ask some of the questions that are in the chat box now. I think, Samantha, you mentioned about paralegal positions as a form of work experience, and someone's asked about the best way to get a paralegal position, and are paralegal positions better than mini pupillages for a CV?
Well, if perhaps I answer the last part of that first, is as far as the CV is concerned, nothing is better than something else. Try and tick all of the boxes first time round, so you've covered everything, and then try and do one of those things impressively, to a point that you'll be sort of perhaps remembered for it. So make sure you've done mini pupillages as well as other types of work experience, and then for me, getting to quite a high level competitive debating was that thing that I can say I'm particularly good at this, but I've ticked all the other boxes too. In terms of paralegal experience, if you're going to finish your undergraduate, do your GDL, do the BBC, and you've got pupillage in that time to start, you're not going to have any time to do paralegal work except in the summers. So if you're one of those lucky few, don't worry about it. For me, paralegal work was a way of filling time between application years. So it took me 3 years pupillage. So it was something to do to earn money and also to be able to have relevant experience. And I made sure to try and get paralegal work in solicitors' firms that instructed the chambers that I wanted to go to, which it's absolutely amazing how many more interviews you get at pupillage when your reference is the main solicitor that instructs that particular chambers. So paralegal work, and also what type of paralegal work. So if you can do that fee earning work and you have experience, if you can get, I had a paralegal job that involved taking notes at court every day, so that courtroom experience is something that's even hard to get during pupillage. So in terms of getting paralegal work, it'll come from law school and the contacts you should make there. But as I said, it's a case of talking to everyone. My first paralegal job came out of a conversation in a pub of so-and-so's looking for someone, and I sent them an email. And then, as I'm sure you all know, it's easier to get a job once you have one, and then you just move on as appropriate from there. So those would be my tips.
Thank you for that. So this next question is just about funding, whether that be for the GDL or any part of the training, and this is open to all panelists. So what options did you have with funding, and what options do you know that are available for non-law students?
I think the really important thing to remember is that the Inns of Court have a lot of money to give both to GDL students and second year senior status law students. It's a well-kept secret that the GDL scholarships at Inns are also available to people in their second year of something like the senior status LLB at Queen Mary. And Inn of Court scholarship is wonderful way to fund your studies, because it does two things. It takes away the financial burden, but also they're very impressive things to have on your CV. And most pupillage committees will instantly rate you for having an inner court scholarship. There's a lot of money in the ends available for students, and so you should certainly look at that. I was lucky enough that I'm American, and the American student loan system paid for my senior status LLB. I do have to pay that back, but I was able to do that. But then when I came to do my bar course, I had an in of court scholarship. I also had pupillage in advance at a set that allows you to draw down some of your pupillage award in the year ahead. So my set where I practice now gave me a portion of my pupillage award a year early, so that I could use it towards my fees. And then I also had a scholarship from the place where I did my bar course. So there's all sorts of different sources of funding that you can cobble together. So do your research, find out what scholarships are available, find out what loan schemes are available, and just make sure that you apply to them.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Those are the only sources of funding that I know, and I think a lot of chambers do the drawdown. We do the drawdown as well, obviously just for the BVC year, but you can, the year before you start, you can draw down up to the full amount of your pupillage, of the amount you need for the bar vocational course from your pupillage award in chambers. So I think those are the only sources of funding that I'm aware of, scholarships and if you get pupillage.
I think also scholarships aren't always in scholarships. So some of the law schools have bursaries and scholarships too. That's something I wasn't aware of and ended up missing deadlines for when it's something, you know, like a short advocacy competition or something for the law school that was a source of additional funding. But it is really hard. A lot of scholarships won't cover your full fees. Certainly living costs on top of that. It's important to work and just do anything you can to be able to make it feasible. But a lot of pupils and people also who weren't successful in getting pupillage have a lot of debt as a result of pursuing the career. So it's something to have your eyes open to and be proactive about sourcing out the funding, because it is difficult.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ask two more questions. Firstly, would you say that the GDL, PGDL is still practical based instead of theory, so it's less essay based, and just can you explain the process of how you get from the PGDL, the GDL to the pupillage?
I'll let Samantha take this one, because from what she said, I think it's changed a bit since I did it. So.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, there'll be a bit of theory. I'm not sure I quite fully understand the question, but it certainly isn't academic in the sense of essay writing. You will need to understand the theory and how the law works in order to answer problem questions. But it's how that focus of teaching the theory is directed towards finding a practical solution in a mock case, for example, rather than was this judgment right, 5,000 word essay. So it's in that case, so it's just that focus shift that's different, but there's definitely legal theory that is involved, and certainly that's the difference between the GDL and then going on to the BPTC. So the GDL is that, even though it's not academically taught, it's the academic course, and then the BPTC you move on to sort of the procedure, rules of evidence, and how the courts actually operate, as well as the skill. You get taught the skills sort of necessary for a career in law. And then in terms of getting pupillage, let me just check what your question said. There's no difference in the application process for a GDL student than anyone else applying for pupillage. All pupillages must be advertised on the pupillage gateway. I think the deadlines are now in January, so check from about November time to when the adverts start going up. and then you either apply through the gateway, or chambers will have their own application forms. You can apply. Often chambers, and I think this might be your question, often chambers recruit over a year in advance of the start date. So for example, if you applied this year, I imagine it would be for a pupillage starting in 2022. Or in the next pupillage cycle, it would be that far ahead. So you can apply for pupillage in your GDL year, and then in your year in between finishing the GDL and starting pupillage is when you'd have to do the BPTC.
Thank you for that. I did say one question, but there's two which look really good. So I'm going to open this up for anyone to take, and then you guys can go. So firstly, as a barrister and as you're self-employed, are there ever periods where you don't have any work at all?
That never happened to me before lockdown. I was wall to wall busy from the minute I hit my second six. And I think that's been how it's been again just recently. But there was a big moment in March where everyone went indoors and the courts stopped having people and my diary emptied. And that was frightening. And I did feel suddenly, I'm self-employed. And in normal circumstances, that shouldn't be something that you have to worry about too much as a barrister, because most sets of chambers have dedicated clerking teams that bring work in and allocate that work on a fair basis between different members and keep you busy. But there are unprecedented crises, as we've learned this year. And I did have a moment, as I think everybody at the bar probably did, where I went, oh my word, I don't have I don't have any work, and therefore I'm not getting paid. But my chambers worked very hard to make that as to limit the pain of that as much as possible by doing things like calling in aged debt for things that we'd done a long time ago that we hadn't gotten paid for yet, making sure that work was, they were monitoring our income to spread work out between us. You do get looked after in a chambers by your clerking team, and that's one of the reasons why the chambers model has survived for so long, is because as opposed to somebody who's maybe working as a sole practitioner, you do have a form of safety net behind you in the form of the administrative aspect of your chambers and your clerking team. And if you're a very big set, maybe you even have a marketing team. You've got people in the background helping make sure the work comes in. So yes, I think I would have answered that question very differently a year ago. And in an ideal world, no, I wouldn't have been without work really at any moment, unless I'd asked to be. But we've all learned that we are in a riskier profession perhaps than others, but it's not been as bad as it might have been for me, at least, and I'm grateful for that.
I mean, I'm probably at the different end of the spectrum in terms of how the crisis hit us, because I think in terms of, are you always going to have work, and what is the remuneration going to be like? The answer is going to be very different depending on what area of law and what type of chambers you go into. So I suppose I'm at the in terms of security of work, I think it's probably slightly easier for us. The chambers that I went into has a reputation, a brand that meant that as soon as I was taken on, I got work, and that has never stopped. And also the type of work that we do, a lot of it, it's, I would say, certainly in the early years, it's 50-50 your own work and lead work. And obviously lead work is quite a good source of income, because there's a fair amount of that in what I do, and it tends to be kind of bulk work, and the sort of things I do and have historically done are large cases that go on for, well, sometimes for years, certainly for months, and often for years. So I think in terms of financial security, the commercial bar is probably more secure in that sense. And for example, when COVID hit, because my practice isn't so court-led, the fact that there was a hiatus in court hearings before they started doing them via Zoom, and via Skype for Business, which actually kicked in quite quickly in the TCC. It's the Technology and Construction Court for a reason. So they got the technology up fairly quickly, so that we were back doing sort of applications, certainly, if not full trials and witness hearings, fairly quickly. But because the nature of my work was long cases where I was doing pleadings, advices and building up, actually, when COVID hit, it didn't change a huge amount of my diary. I had about 3 hearings that were one-day hearings that came out and got put in again, I think, a couple of months later. But apart from that, my workflow didn't really change, and my work life didn't really change, apart from the fact I was commuting into London less often to have comms with clients, and I was doing them over Zoom, and long may that continue given where I live. So yeah, I think I'm from one perspective in terms of the commercial bar, but I suspect it's very different depending on which area you go into.
Well, I think perhaps as being very recently qualified, in fact still waiting for the paperwork to come through, I know no different than practicing in a pandemic. Is the only type of practice I've known, so I'm quite looking forward to working out how things usually work, but certainly I'm running around the magistrates courts like a headless chicken most days, and I was out of court this morning, but that's probably the second time it's ever happened in the last 6 months. We've been ploughing on, attending court, and adapting to sort of the strange new times. But in terms of job security, whilst being self-employed, people are always going to litigate against each other, and people are always going to get arrested in the various disputes. It's a sad reality that people only need us when there's some trouble. And if the status quo were to really change drastically, it's a well-respected career that if you then went on to do something else, which hopefully you won't, and that won't happen to all of us, that it's something that then you would be desirable elsewhere if it came to that. But certainly in terms of work, going to a good set with good clerking team, you have a good relationship, I'm sure you'll be fine. Certainly this is the first month where I don't have the guaranteed privilege, so perhaps I can report back then.
Perfect. So I have one more question. Well, it's kind of two. This is mainly for Lucie. I'm looking at Luke's question right now in the chat box. So he's asked, what does the pupillage committee look for in a competency interview with situational tests, and where are some of the finer judgments made when the final few candidates have a major named in scholarship, top grades, strong personalities and impressive work experience?
Okay, well actually the first thing that you give to us and to me on the pupillage committee is I see all the CVs, the covering letters and the CVs, and your covering letter and your CV, so your academics and your scholarships and your work experience and all of that is what gets you narrowed down to an interview. Once you've got the interview, and we do a 2-round interview process in Chambers, once you've got narrowed down to the first round of interview, actually you almost then start again from a level pegging, because we've made an assessment that academically and in terms of your experience you have hit the right mark, and you then turn up for your interview. And in terms of interviews, we do, the first one's a slightly softer one, it's questions about you, your CV, and then there is I think generally we set a discussion topic, we set a proposition that you have to either argue for or against, and we have a sort of discussion about it. And then the second round, from there we narrow people down again who we feel have performed well in that, to a second round, which tends to be a more advocacy-based assessment. So you are given an advocacy type problem, and you have to present your submissions to us as if you were in court. So you'll be given an application for summary judgment or some sort of advocacy question that is something you can easily argue sort of in that slightly artificial scenario, and you'll be asked questions. And the truth is, as I said, once you get into that interview process, it is no longer judging you on your CV. I don't think I've ever, and I've been on the pupillage committee for a number of years, I don't think we've ever had a position where we've had candidates that are so equal we've had to go back to their CV and try and narrow that down, because once they're in for interview, it's accepted that their CV is good enough. So it really then does come down to the performance in the interview. And that's all. Like it is literally how well you do on those 2 days of your interview, and it's not necessarily even about getting every answer to every question right. It's about how you come across, how you present yourself, how you structure your arguments, because obviously we recognise that different candidates have different levels of legal knowledge, so the questions tend to be set on the basis that they don't require you to know about obscure cases or have levels of legal knowledge that we wouldn't expect from any candidate, and it certainly that it's more about how you argue your points, you get technically right, and how you respond to questions and how you come across. So that's how we would judge it. You know, your CV gets you the interview, and then it's all on your interview for us.
Just want to add on to that quickly, if I may, because I spent an entire year asking myself the last part of your question, because in my second year of applying for pupillage, I got lots of reserve offers, including at the set I eventually got the firm offer at. So for a year, I went from being the reserve candidate, so thinking I had all of those things like everyone else, but there must have been something. So ask for feedback. If you've got to a point where you're down to those last few, then chambers are more likely to be able to give you feedback. And then the next year I got the offer. Something else to be aware of as well is that even at interview, when sets have sort of discarded the CVs from their mind and it's just down to those few things, there's still numerical scores that can be attributed to how you perform in certain categories, sort of talking to people and understanding the breakdown of what numerical scores get attributed to what skill, so that you know perhaps what examples to use in certain questions can only be helpful. But we've all been there. It's definitely something that when taking a particularly tough rejection, you will stay up late thinking about it, no doubt, but also being, as well as asking for feedback, be self-reflective, so that then the next one you can think, well, I maybe, I could smile one more time, or do something else, and be self-reflective so that you can get used to answering that question for yourself.
Perfect. So that's all the questions that I'm going to ask. I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. It was lovely to see so many of you here. And I want to say a massive thank you to all of our panelists. Your information, your experience has been really informative, and I know really helpful for all of the non-law students here. And I also want to thank the Bar Society and the Non-Law Society for co-hosting and helping create this event. I'm just going to put now the link to our STEM at the Bar event, which is coming up on the 19th of October. So if anyone would like to come to that, please do sign up. The link is in the chat box. So yes, thank you again all for coming. We really appreciate it. So we'll hopefully see you at the next event.
Thanks, everybody.